Imagine the soft flicker of candlelight reflected in endless mirrors. We begin in Versailles, in a time when powdered wigs and rustling silks filled the air with whispers. In this golden palace lived a queen who would become a symbol of both elegance and excess, Marie Antoinette. Her name evokes images of diamonds, dresses, and downfall, but behind the myth was a woman caught in history's current. Tonight, we step gently into her world, not to judge, but to drift through the story of a young woman swept by the tides of revolution. Versailles was quiet once, and now your thoughts can be too. Settle in. Let the stillness of the past guide your breath, and the slow story of the queen who lost her head ease you towards sleep. Marie Antoinette was born on November 2nd, 1755, in Vienna, Austria, the 15th child of Empress Maria Theresa and Emperor Francis I. Her full name was Maria Antonia Josepha Johanna. Childhood at the Hofburg and Schönbrunn palaces was filled with music, play, and light education. While her mother ruled with iron discipline, young Antonia laughed through her lessons and danced through her days. Tutors found her charming but distracted. She played the harp, sang, and spoke French. But behind her carefree life, a plan took shape. She was a chess piece in her mother's diplomatic game. Antonia's world was grand and gilded, but her path was already mapped. Her destiny lay not in Austria, but across the border, in the uncertain splendor of the French court. At 14, Maria Antonia was chosen to marry the French Dauphin, Louis Auguste, future King of France. This was no love match. The union was a political move to bind Austria and France after years of hostility. As she crossed the Rhine in 1770, Antonia became Marie Antoinette. In a ceremonial ritual, her Austrian clothes were removed, symbolizing the erasure of her old identity. The exchange was formal, cold. Versailles welcomed her with pomp, but not warmth. Courtiers whispered, nobles watched. Her new husband was shy, awkward, and barely 17. Their marriage was more performance than passion. From the moment she stepped on French soil, Marie Antoinette was an outsider, a teenager cloaked in silk, thrust into the theater of monarchy, far from everything she had known. The journey from Vienna to Versailles took more than 2 weeks. Along the way, Marie Antoinette was paraded through cities, cheered by crowds, and weighed down by expectations. Her convoy included carriages, guards, and gifts. The French were curious, but wary. To many, she was the daughter of an enemy. As she approached the border, an elaborate handover ceremony, called the délivrance, was performed. She stepped into a pavilion, removed her Austrian clothing, and emerged dressed in French fashion. Even her dog was left behind. Her first days in France were rehearsals in etiquette. Every gesture was noted. Behind her smile, nerves tightened. Versailles loomed ahead, dazzling and unknown. The road to queenship had begun, one stiff curtsy at a time. Versailles was breathtaking, gilded halls, endless mirrors, gardens like dreams. But for Marie Antoinette, it was also bewildering. The court followed strict rules: who could speak, who could sit, even who could hand the queen her gloves. Each day was a performance. From dawn until dusk, she was surrounded by people and watched without pause. She struggled with the formalities, stumbled over customs, and missed the warmth of Vienna. Courtiers judged her Austrian manners and youth. Still, she smiled. She hosted balls, played cards, and tried to fit in. But Versailles was not a home. It was a stage. The queen in training had to play her part, graceful, obedient, and silent. But beneath the jewels, she remained a girl far from home. Though Dauphine of France, Marie Antoinette had little influence. Her husband, Louis Auguste, was kind but distant. Their marriage remained unconsummated for years, causing whispers and diplomatic concern. The pressure grew unbearable. Gossip flourished. Pamphlets mocked her as cold or scandalous. Meanwhile, she retreated into a smaller world: music, laughter, trusted friends. She dressed extravagantly and gambled, trying to find joy. The people expected dignity and restraint. Instead, they saw a foreign girl indulging in frills. Her popularity faded. She was not malicious, but misunderstood. Every pleasure she took became another reason to judge her. Behind the palace walls, the seeds of resentment were being quietly planted. When Louis XIV died in 1774, Marie Antoinette became Queen of France at 19. She had no political power, but immense visibility. She embraced her role through fashion, becoming the trendsetter of Europe. Her towering hairstyles, lavish gowns, and expensive tastes enchanted some and infuriated others. At court, she was admired. Beyond the gates, she was called Madame Deficit. France's economy was crumbling. Bread prices rose. Yet the queen sparkled in silk. Her world was one of illusion, distraction, and charm. But outside Versailles, the mood was shifting. Whispers of discontent stirred. The people, burdened by taxes and hunger, began to look at their queen not as a leader, but as a symbol of everything they could no longer afford. In 1774, King Louis XVI gifted Marie Antoinette the Petit Trianon, a secluded palace within Versailles. Here, she found solace. Free from protocol, she decorated it in soft pastels and filled the gardens with lilacs and lilies. She created a rustic village, Le Hameau, where she played at farm life, tending goats and wearing simple muslin dresses. It was her escape, but also her illusion. While peasants starved, she played shepherdess. To the public, it was grotesque. They saw her mocked poverty as insult. But for Marie Antoinette, the Trianon was peace. Here she could breathe, laugh, and be herself. But the divide between queen and country widened. Each flower she planted bloomed in the shadow of revolution. Marie Antoinette surrounded herself with a trusted few. Chief among them, the Duchess of Polignac, her closest confidant. These friendships provided comfort, but stirred resentment. Courtiers without favor gossiped. Libels, scandalous pamphlets, accused her of affairs and manipulation. She was painted as a corrupting force, immoral and foreign. Much of it was slander, but perception ruled. The queen, already isolated, became further ensnared in public suspicion. Still, within her circle, she laughed and danced. They played cards, drank chocolate, whispered late into the night. Versailles was a court of masks, and Marie Antoinette wore hers well, until the crowd outside grew louder than the music within. By the late 1780s, France trembled. The treasury was dry. The people were hungry. Enlightenment thinkers spoke of rights, reason, and revolution. In Paris, pamphlets and speeches ignited minds. In Versailles, the queen still glittered. She hosted masked balls and commissioned portraits. But her image now symbolized excess. "Let them eat cake," a phrase she likely never said, was placed on her lips by rage. The court's indifference became a weapon. Rumors bred resentment. Every jewel she wore became a stone in the wall between her and her people. The queen danced while the streets darkened, and the fire that would consume the monarchy was quietly catching flame. France's finances were in deep trouble. Wars, royal extravagance, and an outdated tax system drained resources. The poor paid heavily. The rich, especially nobles and clergy, often paid little. At court, spending continued. Marie Antoinette, already unpopular, became a symbol of this extravagance. Cartoons mocked her supposed waste. She was nicknamed Madame Deficit. Ministers urged reform, but the court resisted. She was blamed unfairly for decisions beyond her control. The public didn't see her personal efforts to cut expenses. They saw diamonds and parties. The truth was complex, but anger thrives on symbols. As bread prices rose and riots spread, the queen remained at Versailles, disconnected from the turmoil. Rumors of secret lovers and political plots filled pamphlets. Marie Antoinette's Austrian heritage made her a perpetual outsider. Whether guilty or not, she became the perfect target. France's fiscal collapse was vast, but the queen's image bore much of the people's rage. By 1789, desperation led Louis XVI to summon the Estates General, a legislative body not called since 1614. It was a rare moment of hope. Representatives of the First Estate, clergy, Second Estate, nobility, and Third Estate, commoners, gathered to find solutions. The Third Estate, representing the vast majority, quickly found itself sidelined. Voting procedures favored the privileged. Marie Antoinette, distrusted by reformers, aligned with tradition. She saw reform as chaos, not necessity. Outside Versailles, pamphlets demonized her as an obstacle to change. She was portrayed as greedy and foreign, a threat to the nation. Inside the palace, she wore elegant gowns and smiled through ceremonies, but unease grew. The queen's instincts for preservation clashed with the demand for transformation. As debates dragged on, so did frustration. Soon, the commoners would act without royal consent. The Estates General was meant to solve problems. Instead, it helped expose how broken the system truly was. In June 1789, fed up with being ignored, the Third Estate took a bold step. They declared themselves the National Assembly, asserting their right to represent the people of France. Locked out of their meeting hall, they convened in an indoor tennis court. There, They pledged not to separate until they had created a constitution. The moment, immortalized in art and memory, signaled a turning point. Marie Antoinette was deeply troubled. She urged Louis to suppress the movement, but he hesitated. To her, revolution meant chaos, violence, the end of monarchy. To the people, it meant justice and hope. The court was divided. Nobles whispered of betrayal, reformers feared arrest. The queen's anxiety grew. Her influence over Louis increased, but so did public resentment. The oath was a warning, a promise of change. Versailles, with all its splendor, suddenly seemed like a gilded illusion, fragile and fading fast under the weight of history. July 14th, 1789, Paris erupted. The Bastille, a fortress prison symbolizing royal authority, fell to the people. They sought gunpowder and found purpose. It was more than a military victory, it was symbolic. A centuries-old institution had been breached by ordinary citizens. In Versailles, news of the fall reached the court in a wave of disbelief. Marie Antoinette was shocked. Many nobles dismissed the attack as a passing riot. But fear spread. The queen pushed for a show of force, urging Louis to restore control. He remained indecisive. Outside the palace, the mood had shifted permanently. Royal carriages no longer impressed the people. Marie Antoinette's image, already damaged, grew darker. Revolutionary papers painted her as a schemer against liberty. Her Austrian roots were highlighted with scorn. She sensed the tides turning, but could not stop them. The Bastille's fall was the start of something immense. Irreversible, passionate, and utterly beyond the control of kings or queens. October 5th, 1789, Parisian women, angry and hungry, marched to Versailles. Rain poured as they chanted for bread and justice. Thousands joined them. Armed with knives, pikes, and desperation, they stormed the palace. Marie Antoinette barely escaped the mob, fleeing with her children through secret corridors. Her bedroom was invaded, her bed slashed. The next morning, the royal family stood on a balcony, facing a sea of shouting citizens. They were forced to return to Paris. No longer rulers from afar, they were now captives of the revolution. The queen's carriage moved slowly through streets packed with onlookers. Some jeered, others stared. She sat upright, composed, but terrified. Versailles was abandoned, left behind like a dream. At the Tuileries Palace, they would live surrounded by guards, their every move scrutinized. Marie Antoinette's world had changed in a day. The march wasn't just for bread. It dragged the monarchy into the heart of its reckoning. At the Tuileries Palace in Paris, Marie Antoinette lived under constant watch. It was a palace, yes, but also a prison. The queen's movements were restricted. Her letters were opened. Her friends were gone. She tried to maintain dignity, wearing simpler clothes, appearing in public. But each appearance drew whispers or open hostility. She wrote secretly to foreign allies, pleading for intervention. She feared for her children, especially her young son. The newspapers mocked her. Cartoons grew crueler. She saw herself twisted into a villain. Yet she continued her routines. Morning prayers, time with the children, needlework. Outside, France was transforming. The king signed reforms he barely understood. Revolutionary guards patrolled the palace halls. The people believed they were holding tyrants accountable. The queen, once surrounded by opulence, now slept uneasy. Her days blurred into nights. Time passed slowly. She still wore the title of queen, but it meant nothing anymore in revolutionary Paris. June 1791. Fearing for their lives, the royal family attempted escape. Disguised as commoners, they left Paris under cover of night in a large, slow-moving carriage. Marie Antoinette brought clothes, keepsakes, hope. The journey was tense. Every village posed danger. At Varennes, just miles from safety, they were recognized. Word spread quickly. Townspeople surrounded them. The royal family was arrested and returned to Paris under guard. Silence met them in the streets. The escape was seen as betrayal. Marie Antoinette's role was scrutinized. Her letters, her planning, it all fueled public anger. The monarchy had tried to abandon its people. Trust, already weak, collapsed. Now, they were prisoners in name and fact. The queen's spirit dimmed. Her children cried in confusion. She knew the revolution was no longer a protest. It was the end of monarchy. Hope had vanished in a carriage halted by a lantern. In failure, the queen became more hated than ever. After the failed escape, Marie Antoinette's position was shattered. She was a queen in name only. Crowds gathered daily outside the Tuileries, chanting, threatening. Inside, she lived in anxiety. Her son was sick. Her letters were censored. Each day she walked in circles, watching guards with rifles. She still wrote to her brother, the Emperor of Austria, begging for help. These secret correspondences, if discovered, meant treason. She was viewed as a foreign spy. Revolutionary newspapers depicted her as a harpy, corrupting Louis and plotting against France. Her influence was minimal, yet the hatred was vast. Even allies found her cold. Still, she tried to maintain appearances. She taught her children, arranged small family meals. The queen who once danced in diamonds now whispered in shadows. She knew time was short. Each sunrise brought rumors of trials, tribunals, executions. She had no throne, no power, and no friends left in the land she once ruled. August 1792. Revolutionaries stormed the Tuileries Palace. The royal family fled to the National Assembly for protection, but none came. They were arrested and sent to the Temple, an old fortress turned prison. The monarchy officially fell. France declared a republic. Marie Antoinette was confined in a stone cell with her children. She watched as her husband stood trial. He was found guilty of treason and executed by guillotine in January 1793. She was now a widow. Her hair turned white from grief. Her son was taken from her, subjected to cruel treatment to force false confessions. Alone, she prayed, read, and waited. Her name was stripped of royal titles. She was addressed as Widow Capet. Paris no longer feared her. It pitied her, or reviled her, depending on the hour. The queen who once dazzled in silk now sat in silence, awaiting her turn. Outside her cell, the revolution moved on, faster and bloodier. Now known as Widow Capet, Marie Antoinette spent her final months in solitary confinement. Her health deteriorated rapidly. Her once elaborate hairstyles were gone. Her gowns were threadbare. She was allowed no word from her son, who was kept alone and mistreated. Her letters were smuggled out, poignant and simple. She wrote to her sister, to her surviving daughter, to the future. Each message sounded like a farewell. Her trial in October 1793 was swift and merciless. Accused of sexual crimes, treason, and conspiracy, she defended herself with composure. Women in the courtroom wept, but the verdict was predetermined. On October 16th, she was led to the guillotine in a plain white dress. Crowds gathered, silent or sneering. She apologized to her executioner for stepping on his foot. Then the blade fell. The revolution had claimed its queen. What remained was silence, then legend. A life of pageantry ended with dignity and without a crown. After Marie Antoinette's execution, Paris carried on. The reign of terror escalated. More heads rolled, nobles, clergy, revolutionaries alike. Her death was not a conclusion, only a turning point. Some cheered her end. Others, even some former enemies, felt unease. Foreign monarchies were horrified. To them, France had murdered its queen. Across Europe, satirists and mourners alike captured her story. She became a symbol again, of tyranny to some, of tragedy to others. In Austria, her family grieved in silence. In France, public opinion began to shift. She was no longer a villain, but a ghost, haunting paintings, stories, the minds of those who remembered the court at Versailles. In the years to come, many would reflect on her fate. Was she foolish or fated, monster or martyr? The revolution moved on, but the queen lingered, in memory, myth, and melancholy. Her story, already reshaped by history, was far from finished. Marie Antoinette's image transformed again in the decades after her death. In 19th century France, monarchists portrayed her as a misunderstood martyr. Writers romanticized her final days. Paintings softened her features, casting her as a tragic heroine rather than a detached sovereign. In Vienna, her childhood portraits were displayed alongside the somber reality of her fate. Myths bloomed. The queen, who never said, "Let them eat cake," became more famous for it than anything she actually did. As time passed, truth blurred with legend. In literature, she was brave, elegant, doomed. In revolutionary texts, she remained a cautionary tale. Memory softened her mistakes, but rarely absolved them. She became part of a national story, a cautionary figure, both elevated and condemned. The Marie Antoinette of memory was no longer a woman, but a mirror, of power, privilege, and the people's wrath. And for many, she came to represent a lost world, glittering and gone. Versailles, once her stage, is now a museum. Tourists walk its halls, peering into chambers where kings and queens once whispered. Her bedroom is preserved, elegant and empty. In the Hall of Mirrors, her reflection is gone, replaced by the footsteps of visitors. Guides speak of her fashions, her parties, and her downfall. Her likeness appears in gift shops, on mugs and magnets. The palace itself stands still, timeless, even as her story changes. Outside, manicured gardens bloom each spring. Inside, her name draws questions. Was she cruel? Was she naive? Each room offers no answers, only echoes. Versailles, stripped of royalty, survives as a monument. It invites admiration and reflection. The same chandeliers that glittered over her dances now shine for tourists. The opulence remains, but the laughter is long gone. What was once a symbol of royal power now hums quietly with the memory of a queen who lost everything. Perhaps the most famous phrase attributed to Marie Antoinette, "Let them eat cake," was almost certainly never said by her. The quote first appeared in Rousseau's writings when she was just a child. Still, the line stuck. It fit the narrative, a queen out of touch, heartless in the face of suffering. Over time, the phrase became shorthand for elite ignorance. It followed her into death and beyond. Historians have long debunked it, but myths often survive facts. The line endures because it's simple, evocative, useful. It paints a complex woman with a single brushstroke. In truth, she was more cautious, even fearful, than arrogant. But in revolution, symbols matter more than substance. The phrase became her legacy, regardless of truth. Today, it's printed on souvenirs, whispered in documentaries, and etched into collective memory. The real Marie Antoinette, woman, mother, queen, was lost behind 7 words she likely never uttered. Marie Antoinette had 4 children. Only one would survive into adulthood. Her firstborn, a daughter, died young. Her son, the Dauphin, died of illness in the palace. The second son, Louis Charles, became a tragic figure. After his parents' imprisonment, he was taken from his mother and subjected to abuse meant to force confessions. He died at just 10 years old, likely from neglect. The Queen's youngest daughter, Marie Therese, was imprisoned but later released in a prisoner exchange. She lived quietly in exile, carrying the heavy weight of her lineage. She never returned to France permanently. Of all the Queen's joys and dreams, her children were the deepest. Their fates reflected the cruelty of the times. For Marie Antoinette, separation from them was worse than any trial. The revolution punished her, but it devastated them. In the end, her legacy lived on not through a throne, but through a daughter, silent and sorrowful. Marie Antoinette influenced fashion as much as politics. At Versailles, she set trends that spread across Europe. Her towering hairstyles, extravagant gowns, and ribbons filled paintings and imagination. She worked with famed designers like Rose Bertin, crafting looks that defined the era. But her lavish style drew criticism. As France struggled, her wardrobe seemed obscene. Yet she also led a shift toward simplicity. Her chemise à la reine, a loose muslin dress, shocked conservatives but inspired future styles. In portraits, she transformed from glittering monarch to pastoral muse. Her fashion was both personal expression and political symbol. Admirers copied her. Critics condemned her. Today, she is remembered as a fashion icon. Museums display her dresses. Designers cite her influence. But her style also tells a story of beauty, rebellion, and a queen trying to shape her image as the world around her unraveled. Fashion gave her power, but never protection. Marie Antoinette's letters reveal another side of her, affectionate, thoughtful, sometimes desperate. She wrote regularly to her family in Austria, especially her mother, Maria Theresa, and her brother, Emperor Joseph II. She also maintained correspondence with Axel von Fersen, a Swedish nobleman rumored to be her close confidant, and perhaps more. Their letters, coded and intimate, suggest deep affection, possibly romantic love. During captivity, her letters became more urgent. She asked for help, detailed her fears, and expressed devotion to her children. Some letters were intercepted, others smuggled out. They paint a woman not of marble but of flesh, lonely, frightened, and determined. Historians still debate the extent of her relationships, but the letters stand as testimony. Behind the crown was a woman yearning to be heard. In ink and paper, she found a fragile freedom. The Queen's voice, often silenced in life, endured quietly in these tender, desperate pages. Executions during the French Revolution became public events. The guillotine stood in central squares, surrounded by crowds. Vendors sold programs and souvenirs. Marie Antoinette's execution was no exception. She rode in an open cart, hands tied, dressed simply. The journey took nearly an hour. Onlookers stared. Some jeered, others stood silent. She remained composed, even regal. At the scaffold, she stepped carefully, apologizing for a misstep. Her death, like her life, was observed, recorded, judged. It was not private. It was theater. The revolution believed justice must be seen. But in that final moment, many saw something else. Courage, perhaps, or resignation. The blade fell, and the crowd dispersed. Paris moved on. The queen, once larger than life, was reduced to a moment of silence, a story retold. The guillotine ended her life, but not her presence. In that public square, history took a breath, and then kept going. Marie Antoinette's image has shifted with each generation. To some, she was a villain, frivolous, unfeeling, foreign. To others, a tragic queen, misunderstood and maligned. Historians debated her influence, her actions, her guilt. Plays and films reimagined her. Regal, romantic, reckless. The 2006 film by Sofia Coppola portrayed her as a teenager trapped in gold and expectation. Earlier biographies cast her as a stoic martyr. Political thinkers dissected her legacy. Was she responsible for France's collapse or merely a symbol of it? The truth lies somewhere in between. She was a complex figure, privileged, flawed, but human. Her life became a canvas for others' fears and dreams. Each era painted her anew. In revolution, she was hated. In reflection, she became a mirror. Her story still resonates, not for answers it gives, but for the questions it raises. In Marie Antoinette, we see the cost of spectacle, the danger of myths, and the fragility of power. Today, Marie Antoinette is remembered more than understood. Her face graces postcards and museum plaques. Her gowns inspire designers. Her name appears in novels, songs, and debates. She remains one of the most famous queens in history, not for her rule, but for her fall. She has become emblematic of a world that collapsed under its own weight. Her story reminds us of the perils of detachment, the weight of perception, and the unpredictable tides of public opinion. Whether she was scapegoat or saboteur, Marie Antoinette endures. She lived through opulence and downfall, love and loss, reverence and ridicule. Her final words, her quiet dignity at the scaffold, remain haunting. In death, she achieved the humanity denied her in life. She was once a girl from Vienna, then a queen of France, and finally a symbol of revolution. Now, centuries later, she rests in history's uneasy peace, forever watched, forever debated, forever remembered.